I randomly stumbled across this cute little tube headphone amplifier and well, I gotta have it. It was pretty cheap and this made me even more suspicious of what kind of audio quality this thing will put out, but that's what we're here to find out. I'll tell you a bit about the amp and the very unpleasant surprise that thing had in store for me. Hey, Julian Kraus here, and this is the Nobsound NS-02E. I bought it probably a year ago and have never gotten around to do a full review, but here we finally are. Build quality wise, the 02E is better than you would actually expect. It has an all-metal housing, which I think looks really cool in the hexagonal shape. The tube is protected by this brass and acrylic ring structure, although I personally prefer the minimalistic look with it taken off. I'm definitely not an expert on tubes, so I can't tell you anything about the one they used here, but I don't expect anything fancy for the price. I'm also not the biggest fan of illuminating tubes with blue LEDs. I know they should look cool, but I think it takes away from the natural warm glow of the tubes. On that note, that's of course something that mustn't be absent from a tube amplifier, and when you turn on the amp you can clearly see the tube glow. Nice. The volume dial feels quite decent as well, although its big downside is that it is stepped. That alone wouldn't be a big issue, but in the lower range the steps are as coarse as a 3 dB, and I often found one setting to be too quiet and the next one to be too loud. Towards the higher volume settings the steps become smaller and smaller, which also skews the whole range, and you oftentimes find yourself only using the lower half of the volume dial. Here's a small look inside, but I won't go into details here. Dave Jones from the EEV blog already did a teardown of a similar unit, which I will link below. While you're already checking the description, click that subscribe button, that really helps me to make more videos. One more thing you quickly notice with the 02E is that it is cheating a bit, as the tube itself is not the primary source of amplification, but actually the small op amps. The signal is likely only run through the tube to give it a bit more tube character. Let's talk about that. In my first listening test with low impedance headphones I could instantly hear three things: a lack in bass, some noise as well as a slight squealing noise, and distortion. Some would argue that a certain amount of noise also contributes to the charm of tube amplifiers, but the constant background noise was just getting a bit too much for my taste. So I don't think that it comes as a surprise that in my noise measurements the amp didn't fare too well. One thing I also noticed is that the noise is strongly dependent on the volume setting. There are some settings which have just much more noise than other settings, and interestingly only when a signal is playing. So it felt like the noise was modulated by the signal, which is very strange. The slight squealing noise I attribute to the cheap switch mode power supply. The lack in bass is easily explained. I measured the frequency response and as you can see the lower frequencies are rolled off. By the way, this is also load dependent, so this gets even worse with low impedance headphones, and conversely this also improves with high impedance headphones. By the way, the output impedance of my particular device is also nicely low, although the reason why you want to have that is that you do not want to have any frequency response variations with different headphones, and well, as you could see from the response measurements, this hardly matters when the response of the amp already heavily varies with different loads. Now, in terms of distortion, you can see that it got a red rating here in my tests, but I think this is a bit unfair for a tube amp because this thing does not want to be transparent and instead color the sound with all its juicy tube-style saturation. On that note, not all distortion sounds the same. There's a certain flair that tubes have, which is an uneven waveform distortion, which leads to even-order harmonics. I made a whole video about the topic if you're interested, and there I also let you listen to different styles of distortion. But back to the 02E. It produces a significant amount of second-order harmonic, and the higher-order harmonics fall off quite fast. With lower impedance headphones, the even-order harmonics are also dominating, contributing to the tubey vibe of the output. That's of course only one single snapshot. The amount of distortion changes with the output, and you can see that here. For transparent devices this graph would be absolutely horrible, but for a tube amp this is pretty much expected and likely what you want. Although one could argue that even for a tube amp this is already quite a lot of distortion, so in that regard the 02E is not subtle, at least not with low impedance headphones. With higher impedance headphones the story slightly changes. Here the distortion in the lower frequencies is less pronounced, and as mentioned before the frequency response is also flatter, so 80 to 150 ohm headphones for this amp seem to be a sweet spot where you get the tube sound but also still a decent audio quality. Higher impedance headphones also tend to have a lower sensitivity, so you will also tend to hear less noise. What is nice to see that even with higher impedance headphones, that they could be driven to a loud listening level, although not deafeningly loud. On that note, this thing scared the shit out of me when I did my first listening test. I should absolutely know better, but I had my headphones already plugged in when I turned on the amp, and that created a very loud cracking sound. I turned off the amp with its power button, this time the headphones already removed from my head, but there was an even louder crack coming from my headphones. I could easily hear that with the headphones laying quite a distance away from me. So I did some tests, and here are the voltage spikes with a 32 ohm load connected to simulate a pair of headphones. That's the transient when turning on the amp, and as you can see it has a peak of around 1.5 volts over a duration of 75 milliseconds. When turning off it's even worse, this spiked up to a whopping 4 volts over a span of a quarter second. That's absolutely crazy, and with sensitive IEMs this is outright dangerous for the headphones and your hearing. I think it goes without saying, but this is unacceptable even for a device as cheap as this. So I guess it's true, you get what you pay for, and that's certainly the case here. It is a tube amp, and arguably it did give a tubey sound with all the audible saturation, but the high noise floor, the squealing noise of the power supply, and the downright dangerously loud cracking sound when turning on or off the amp pretty much spoils the whole fun. So the NS-02E is probably going to live as a paperweight in my home now, because while it's not great to listen to, it looks pretty damn cool. Subscribe for more reviews, give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I will see you all in the next one.